We have Anna in Michigan. Thanks for waiting. Hello?
Hey, Anna.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, okay. What? My finger was like on the button.
It was
so
there.
Welcome back.
There.
I'm sorry, I muted it and then my screen turned off.
Thanks for waiting. You're on with Matt and Phil.
Matt, you're super intimidating. Oh my gosh.
I'll shut up then and I'll let Phil talk.
Oh dear. Yeah, go for it, Anna.
Okay. So, okay, really quick. Your first caller. The question here is like, what's the point of your show? I'm an atheist. I was sort of on the cusp of being an atheist for like 10 years, but I had a run-in with a really toxic theist, and I was like, oh gosh, what's out there to like learn about religion? And I found the Bible Reloaded with Hugo and Jake, and I was like, man, I'm definitely an atheist now. But so I just wanted to thank you guys for existing, because you kind of give people, atheists who don't, know exactly what's out there, what communities are out there. They look, well, what's out there, and they look on the internet and they find you guys, and you're sort of an outlet if they don't have a lot of, or if they come from religion, they don't have a lot of other outlets. But okay, so I guess to my question, I was kind of wondering, I guess there are people who were religious and then come to atheism and then sort of teeter-totter on going back to religion, just because, being an atheist, at least for me, is a little scary, because, man, what is my community going to think? What's my family going to think? Am I going to be ostracized? That sort of all those thoughts running through your head. It's like, isn't it just easier to suck it up and go to church once a week, or if you're a Christian, or observe all these other holidays? Isn't it just easier to be a theist? And even if you don't believe, I was curious if you guys had any thoughts on that, or if you had any advice for somebody who might just be thinking, it's easier to call myself a Christian, and even if I'm not really sure about God or all of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it can be not as straightforward as you would want it to be. I mean, in a perfect type of world, someone can come out as atheist and you don't suffer any ramifications from family or from job or anything else, and you're just fine. But unfortunately, that's not where we are at this time. There's a lot of little things that can come into place. Your family, they could ostracize you. You could be that kind of black sheep in the family where you come to gatherings and, they might gather to pray and they kind of look at you like, we thank the Lord, as they kind of look at you or something like that, to kind of make you feel some kind of way about that situation. And so it's hard to say, depending on situations. There are some situations where people have to think about their own safety. For example, there are a lot of places where if you would come out, you may be threatened with verbal or physical assault. And so in those cases, it may indeed be easier until someone can escape that situation and be able to, live truly and freely the way that they wish to. It may be easier for them to do so. Those that are dependent on their families or parents for financial support, if they're in college, for example, they may be an atheist and they go to rallies or do something in secret, but when they go home to their families, they may be the same Bible-believing person that their family knows, and just for not wanting to risk their livelihood going forward. So it's a very tough question, and it's so hard to give advice when I don't know your situation in particular for us to do. You know your situation better than anyone, but just in a general purpose, it's up to you to kind of evaluate your situation, all the things that you can lose, whether it be your job or, if your boss finds out, could they take, some kind of action against you or something like that, giving you more work, or firing you. Not hopefully not directly like that, because that would help violate some laws. But it's very difficult to go about that. It's really a hard choice, and it really comes down to the individual looking at their own situation and evaluating the risk that they would take for coming out. And that's why it's so important for those that are able to come out to do so as to help normalize atheism in general, so that other people coming out in more questionable situations may not fear as much backlash, or the backlash may be a lot better. I mean, coming out as gay, that depending on when you did that, if you go back a few decades, you could be disowned. But people still, that was in the 90s and the 2000s, like the Trevor Project was created for people that were kicked out of their homes because they came out as a part of the LGBTQ community, and their parents or their caregivers didn't accept it and kicked them out, and they had no place to go, no resources or whatever else. So,
if I'm not intimidating, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear that there's a distinction. So whether you're a theist or whether you're an atheist addresses only whether or not you are convinced that there's a God.
Sure.
That's completely separate from what you do. There are plenty of atheists who claim to be theists or act like theists. There are clergy people, this is why we have the Clergy Project, right, who are actually atheists and yet still stand up in the pulpit. So we're really asking two different questions. Yes, there are people who may become an atheist and then go back to being a theist, but there's also people who may go back to acting like a theist. You were talking about going to church and things like that. That's completely separate from what you believe about God. You could believe that it's in your best interest to go to church, participate in that community, because it alleviates family conflicts and all that. And that's what Phil and I were talking about earlier, and what Phil's talking about now is the people who can come out, we'd love for them to do so, because it makes it easier for other people who don't feel safe coming out. Just like if you're gay, you can act straight. Doesn't change who you are.
All right.
You can hide it, you can have a beard, you can be a gay man married with kids and just keep this secret life because the world isn't safe for you yet, or you're just not comfortable being as out about it as other people. Those are separate issues, what you believe and what you do.
All right. Do you think in, like, I don't know, obviously you're not fortune tellers, but do you think in 20 to 30 years, do you see atheism becoming more normalized? Like, I guess now it's not nearly as bad as it was maybe in the 50s and 60s after the war, where we're sort of going through a pretty religious time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just do you see, just at least in America, or in the U.S., do you see it changing?
Absolutely.
Becoming more normal?
I would definitely think so. The amount of people that are out doing shows like this, other secular organizations or free thought communities or atheist organizations that are actually out and doing work in their communities and exposing more and more people to the fact that a lot of the population doesn't actually believe in a deity, and yet they are still good people, doing good things, or living their lives just as normally as these believers are. And so I think as more organizations start popping up, as people feel more comfortable starting those organizations in their neck of the woods where it hasn't existed before, it's easy, like for Austin, for somebody to, I'm going to start an atheist organization here, but well, let's go to a small town out in Texas. It's a lot more difficult on this side. But as more people start making those organizations and getting that word out there, Pew Research doing those surveys where they're looking at the religiosity of the population over time and putting that information out there that people aren't believers, as atheists become a larger voting bloc and a more visible voting bloc, in my mind, I hope that it would start normalizing things to where it might be easier for people down the line to come out and not have to have so much fear about the backlash they'll receive in their personal or professional lives.
All right.
I think all the data shows that the trend is towards a more secular world. That doesn't mean that we're not going to, vacillate, that there'll be setbacks. It'll become more secular and then less, but the general trend is towards a more secular world. And at a minimum, with regard to your concerns, largely we are constantly moving towards more atheist normalcy, more acceptance of people who are non-believers. Since the 50s, when the Supreme Court ruled on whether or not atheists could run for office, and the answer is yes, we can. It doesn't matter what your state constitution says, that's already been overturned by Supreme Court ruling. But generally speaking, you had this spike in the US in Christian fundamentalism, and there's been a reaction to that, both from moderate and liberal theists and from the secular non-theistic community. And what we've seen is, if you look back to when Madalyn Murray O'Hair was creating, American Atheist, and she's on TV and she's talking about these things, she was the most hated woman in America. And that's just what she was called. That's generally what she was. And she was fighting a fight, and she was sometimes awful and sometimes wonderful, but there weren't a lot of people doing it. Now we live in an era where not only are there more people doing it, but there's far more opportunities. I mean, this show is going to be, it's live streaming to YouTube. There's countless YouTube atheists. You're seeing more and more events where secularists are engaging in conversation. I do a ton of them. Pangburn Philosophy is putting on a bunch of them. You've got Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, other people who are booking a theater to sit down and talk about these issues and drawing crowds of thousands. That wouldn't have happened in the early 90s. It certainly wouldn't have happened in the 70s or 80s. We lost a little bit. If you go back to the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, when Colonel Ingersoll was speaking, he spoke at the Republican National Convention. He was the great agnostic. He was in newspapers having arguments and debates with preachers. He gave these great orations to large crowds. And then we had sort of a reversion, and things got more conservative. Things got more fundamentalist for a while. You're going to go through those trends, but I think all the data show that we're getting closer and closer to maybe a tipping point on atheist, on a secular world, but certainly I think we're close to a tipping point on atheist normalcy.
That's really, I don't know, that's nice to hear, I guess. I think that's all of my questions.
Cool.
I wanted to, oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Go ahead.
Oh. I was just gonna say also, thank you. You guys are the reason my husband is now an atheist. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. But he's the reason he's an atheist. We just talk. There's a 1,000 other people who heard us say the same things he did, and they didn't change their mind. But
that's fair.
We are happy to do this. And I hope things get easier for you, and I appreciate the call, and hopefully, I wasn't too intimidating.
No, it's not. I'm just glad I'm not a theist trying to convince you of anything.
Well, we'll get back to that next. Take care, Anna. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Right.
That's, getting back to the first call, when we were talking about what's the purpose of the show. Mm-hmm. There's not a purpose. The ultimate goal is to make the show and atheist activism obsolete, because we live in a better world. But it's, the theist calls often, we try to make them take priority.
Yeah.
They also get the most attention and the most views. But we also are happy to talk to other atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, seculars, whatever label you want to use.
The community.
Because if we didn't engage in that, if this was just argue with theists for an hour and a half, I don't think that we'd be making the progress that we are. Because we're building communities. You've got Oasis and Sunday Assembly and atheist community and secular community and skeptics at the pub and free-thinking organizations. And then you have charitable things like Foundation Beyond Belief, Atheists Helping the Homeless, Humanists at Work, the Ramp Project, blood drives, all of these things. We're showing that religions have had a privileged position in the West in particular, and worldwide. In some cases, you have straight-up theocracies. And this put them in an unfair position such that when people thought about good,
right, yeah.
when they thought about charity, when they thought about things that were beneficial to their communities, they thought about churches. Because in a church, synagogue, whatever, you have a building, you have a community center. Yes, it's founded around religion, but it fills a lot of voids in the community. And the one thing I've talked about before is when I was a Southern Baptist, if I packed up and left Austin and moved to, I don't know, San Antonio, there's a Baptist church there, a dozen, probably within a few miles of me that I could go to, and I've got a ready-made, built-in community where I just have to say, yep, I'm a Baptist and I'm in like Flint. We are working to build similar things in the atheist community. It's going to take some time, in part because we don't have the privileged status that religion has. We don't have de facto tax-free, and the churches are hiding the money in their books and you don't have to be public about it. But we're starting, it's like we gave religion a 1,000-year head start. And if you look at the progress that we've made just in the last 20 years on building communities and increasing activism and building secular organizations and charities, it's astounding. And I think that speaks volumes to both how the world is changing and how this show, the various other shows, the conversations, and the projects that we work on are changing the world. We'll get there. And as long as we don't blow ourselves up first.
One show at a time.
Yeah, or melt.